we read Amidah, and Amidah is daily prayer, and normally the structure of the Amidah would have 3 first blessings, and 3 last blessings will be the same regardless of the occasion, regardless of the day. But the middle part will vary. On weekdays, there are many blessings where we ask for health, we ask for good, for rain so that we have enough food to eat. We ask for all sorts of things. But on Shabbat, the idea is that we don't ask on Shabbat. We try to accept the world as it is. However, what happens when you really want to ask for something? And this is one of my favorite parts in Rabbinic Judaism. When the decision is made that you can't ask, but you really want to ask for something important, for example, for peace in the world, for the end of a war, how can you do that? And the rabbis came with the solution. We say thank you, but thank you in advance. So, thank you for bringing peace. One day you will bring peace on earth. And that's a very interesting. And this is the reflection of a moral dilemma. That on the one hand, the solution was made, the decision was made that we don't ask on Shabbat, but how do you still do that? And this inner dilemma is something that I think is familiar to all and many people. What do you do when you have ethical dilemma inside you? And you have variety of opinions sometimes around you. Different people hold different opinions. They conflict with each other. And you personally don't agree with some. As a liberal Jew, of course, I am supposed to be supportive of a dialogue and of all the conflicting opinions. We ought to debate, we ought to express. The freedom of expression is important. On the other hand, sometimes I need to take a side. So sometimes decisions we make divide people. And the question I would like to ask us all today, is there such a thing as good division? Of course, we know the famous rule, divide and rule, right? So the famous principle. Sometimes people divide society deliberately to make each part weak so that it will be easier to rule, to manipulate the decisions. But is there such a thing as good division? In her book, Confidence, Rosabeth Moss Kanter, she's at Harvard Business School. She writes, leadership is not about the leader. It's about how he or she builds the confidence of everyone else. So this concept is very different. It's the opposite from the traditional divide and rule approach to leadership. It's not about making individuals weaker or individual parts weaker, but about the empowerment of all parts of a larger system. There's another book called Atomic Habits. It's one of the best sellers over the last few years. And James Clear tells a story about an organization which was the governing body for professional cycling team of Britain. And in 2003, they hired a new performance director, surname Brainsford, and he was hired to put British cycling on a new trajectory with a great hope. And what made him very different from traditional coaches is his approach, is his strategy that he referred to as marginal gains. It is the philosophy of searching for tiny, for little marginal improvements of everything, in everything you do. The whole principle came from the idea that if you broke down everything you could think of in smaller parts, in everything that goes into riding a bike, and then improve each individual part by just 1%, tiny improvements, you will get a significant increase when you put all the parts together. So this way, each part of the larger system works towards the mutual aim, achieving the best possible results for all. Just 1% of improvements of all individual parts can lead to a substantial increase of the result of the entire system. This is an example of a very positive leadership, when you divide something in order to improve individual parts. In this week's Torah portion, we read about the story how the opposite approach, how division among the people and the lack of good leadership led to irreversible disaster for the entire system. It was perhaps the single greatest collective failure of leadership in the Torah. The 12 Spies, the famous story of the 12 Spies, as recorded in the book of Numbers in this week's Torah portion, tells us about a group of Israelite chieftains, heads of each tribe. 12 tribes, 12 representatives from each tribe, who were asked by Moses to go and look at the land of Canaan and evaluate it as a potential home for the Israelite people. 10 of the spies came back with a negative report, and only 2 said something positive about it. The negative report sounded this way: "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey. It's a great land. And this is its fruit." And it's important to understand, there are famous paintings about it, when they took just one branch of grapes, and it was not just the little one that we used to, but it was huge, that it took 2 people to carry it together. One branch of grape. It's maybe a slight exaggeration, but it tells you that the land is great. Everything flows there, and everything grows there. So I continue. "However," they said, "the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very, very large. We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height, giants, they're all giants. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers. And so we seemed to them." Perhaps it was true that the task of conquering the promised land seemed impossible. There were other people living there, and the idea of invading foreign land and conquering its cities was unthinkable for the majority of the spies. Interesting how you see it through the current historical events. So, and we were in their position probably at that time, invading a different country. Interesting. And perhaps these 10 spies were right, not to be critical of this task. But both in the eyes of in the eyes of Torah commentators, the 10 spies made an inexcusable mistake. They made people feel small, unable to achieve anything. And that was their main mistake. Not the fact, not the criticism. According to the early rabbinic text Mishnah, the narrative of the transgression of spies is dated on the 9th of month. So all this happened when they came back and reported on the 9th of Av, a collective date of all disasters in Jewish history. According to our tradition, time after time, catastrophes will fall on this day on Jewish people. Both first and second temple were destroyed, and countless of other national disasters and tragedies were attributed to be fallen on the 9th day of the Hebrew month Av. on the same day. And that day was later institutionalized as a national day of fast, similar to Yom Kippur, when we have 25 hours without food or water. So later on, Talmudic rabbis reflected on this day and tried to articulate reasons. So why? What was the core? What are we fasting about? They asked. And they asked two important questions. One, why was the first temple destroyed? They said. And the answer was, because they were idolaters. They engaged in idolatry. The first temple the people had the first temple, but at the same time, they served this god, they served the other god, just in case. However, they said, the second temple, people were not engaged in idolatry then. Why was the second temple destroyed then? And the answer they gave, that it was destroyed due to sinat chinam in Hebrew, baseless hatred among people. According to the Torah, the story of the spies, the origin story of the 9th of Av, of all the tragedies in people, and their negative report was the main reason for the fatal decision. People of that generation were not allowed to enter the promised land. And it was then, when it was decided that they had to spend 40 years in the wilderness. It was not the fact of criticism that led to this decision, not the warning against powerful enemies, but the fact that 10 out of 12 spies, the majority of people, made others feel incapable, small, insignificant. The fact that they didn't have the most basic belief in people. The fact that they caused sinat chinam, baseless hatred, unnecessary animosity among their people. Later on, the Jewish tradition will come up with another idea. If the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred, or unconditional hatred, that's another translation. What will be the opposite? What is the way? And the answer was ahavat sinam, baseless love or unconditional acceptance. This Shabbat, as we read this story, let's hope that one day we will live in a society that empowers people and not divides. Have belief in others, and most importantly, doesn't have sinat chinam, baseless hatred, but instead have ahavat sinam, baseless and unconditional acceptance of all. And this Shabbat gives me a great, great pleasure to see that the synagogue is coming back to hosting dinners, to conducting weddings, and that's a part of it. So we are different, and all parts of our ark, of our doors of our ark, they are all different, but yet we are all together. We can be together and yet have different opinions. Shabbat Shalom.